There's a first time for everything. The first time you drive a car, the first time you get a paycheck, the first time you bomb a federal drug enforcement agency building. Actually, firebombing a federal building is a first I personally didn't experience. In fact, no one did until 1990. It happened in Fort Myers, Florida, a town I'm seriously starting to worry about. This is the same place where the teenage criminal cult from Obedience to Ashes firebombed a historic Coca-Cola plant. And it's just down the road from Naples, home of the Benson car bombing case we deep dived last year, another case with prominent connections to drugs and things that go boom. All these cases have two things in common: mind-altering substances and explosions. If you had a hankering for chemically reprogramming your brain, Fort Myers and the surrounding towns were the place to be in the 80s and 90s, especially if your drug of choice was the kind you could stick up your nose. And if you were especially fond of fireworks, apparently you could get your fix of that there as well, as we're about to find out. This is a story about powerful, pernicious powder and the pyrotechnics it set in motion. Cocaine. We're talking about cocaine. But that's not all we're talking about, because cocaine comes with a cascade of complications. Complications that in this case catapulted a small-time drug hustle into a criminal chain of events culminating in a fireball that shook Fort Myers to its core. One night in 1990, local authorities responded to a call about a pipe bomb detonating outside the home of a fire marshal. But little did they know, that was just the beginning. By the time the sun rose, Fort Myers would be the site of the very first bombing of a federal DEA office building, and the perpetrator was a pizza-slinging purveyor of powder with a penchant for problem-solving through extreme prejudice. This is the case of Jeff Matthews, a 23-year-old kid who sent an entire town reeling for years, until his hubris finally caught up to him. This is Pizza, Powder, and Pyrotechnics, the boy who bombed the feds, on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter, and your friendly podcasting fire nerd.
And I'm the saboteur of the sacred seating arrangement. If you find yourself sitting next to someone you can't stand or in a chair that suddenly feels less stable than it did yesterday, that's me.
We're so happy to have you here for this week's edition of Flambéed Crime, but before we get into it, we have to thank Sweden. Y'all Scandinavians put us on the Apple Podcast charts this week, and we're so happy about it we could dance on an Ektorp sofa. That's an IKEA joke for those of you who have never spent half a day eating meatballs and wandering through an urban maze of flat-pack furniture hell.
Those meatballs are so good.
But whether you're listening from the land that birthed ABBA or anywhere else, we need you to please leave us one of those incredibly helpful 5-star ratings and a written review if you're feeling extra generous. Reviews and ratings are the best way to support small indie creators like us. Other ways to help: tap those icons when you see our content on social media. Give us the likes, leave the comments, repost to your audience, help us grow. Because court records aren't cheap and our advertising budget is non-existent.
Yes.
You can find us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, and even YouTube. Anywhere and everywhere you can engage with us is appreciated. As always, you can email us your fire stories, case suggestions, and IKEA horror or humor stories at crimetoburn@gmail.com. Also, you can buy stuff, and we won't even make you build it yourself. In our show notes, you'll find a handy little link to our spread shop where you can pick up Crime to Burn hoodies, tees, tanks, and mugs, and not a single one comes with an Allen wrench. And if you hate podcast ads, Steve is welcoming you to the sacred snack table of salvation. We're in the final days of prepping our Patreon for launch, and if you thought the outtakes were unhinged, you're in for a treat. We'll have 3 membership tiers, so you can choose the one that spiritually aligns with you. And if you're not ready to make a spiritual and financial commitment to Steve, that's okay. Crime to Burn will always be free on your favorite podcast platform. But you can get even more of us by following David Don't Know, that's DAYVID with a Y, because our episode with him drops August 28th. We've also got episodes coming up with Sasquatch and Sourdough and others, and I'll be sharing more details about those as soon as I have them. And coming this spooky season, I'm participating in another Podcasters Give Back collaboration. The theme this time is Cases That Haunt Us, where multiple podcasters donate their time, research, and editing for episodes that all drop on the You Should Be Here podcast. All proceeds from ad revenue go straight to the victims' support organizations. And if you haven't listened to past seasons, we were a part of season 2, which was called Or No, and focused on cases of domestic violence. So go check it out and keep an eye out for cases that haunt us coming this October. Finally, one last note about our emergency bonus episode from 2 weeks ago, the fight for justice in the murder of Paul Clifford. The increased attention we brought to this case clearly made the Pima County justice system anxious because they filed a motion for a gag order. The good news is it was denied, and your outcry for justice is making an impact. The judge declined to rule on the plea deals until after the hearing for the third defendant. The Clifford family has now asked the Pima County Attorney's Office to recuse themselves from the case and hand it over to the Arizona Attorney General's office. So they're asking for continued public pressure, and I'm asking you to keep speaking out. Sabrina, Paul's daughter, wrote a very powerful letter to the Pima County Attorney's Office, which I reposted on our TikTok account. Please go read it, share it, comment, because the public outcry is working. I'm still waiting on records I requested after uncovering some concerning things about the Pima County Attorney's Office, and once those requests are filled, I'll be sharing everything I learn on social media, so make sure you're following us there. And remember, it is our right, our duty as citizens to scrutinize our justice system and speak up when it fails the people that it is meant to serve. Now let's get back to Fort Myers, Florida, where things were heating up in the worst possible way on March 16, 1990. A Fort Myers fire marshal was at home when an explosion ripped through the quiet night. A pipe bomb had been thrown into his driveway packed with live ammunition, because apparently the regular kind of bomb just didn't have enough spice. Shrapnel tore through his vehicles, punched holes in the walls of his house, and damaged a neighbor's home and absolutely shredded a nearby shed. Miraculously, no one was hurt, but everyone within a 2-mile radius probably had a collective spike in blood pressure. The only eyewitness could give a vague description of a car speeding away, something along the lines of, yeah, it was car-shaped. As evidence techs combed the scene, detectives questioned the homeowner. He couldn't think of anyone in his personal life who might want to hurt him. But professionally, that was another story. He mentioned a recent run-in with an irate business owner, a young man who ran a pizza joint called Andretti's. The shop had failed a fire inspection, and the owner had not taken kindly to being told he had code violations. That man was 23-year-old Jeff Matthews. Police knew his name well. Matthews wasn't just a purveyor of tasty pies. No, this kid had depth. He was already the prime suspect in a string of brutal crimes tied to his side hustle.
And nothing gives you depth like being tied to a series of crimes.
You see that pizza joint? It was a front for a major cocaine operation. Because nothing says family restaurant like a side of marinara and a kilo. Investigators had never been able to nail him with an indictment, but not for lack of trying. With no solid witnesses to tie him to this attack, they pinned their hopes on whatever evidence techs could dig out of the sighting and vehicle panels. But without a break, they probably figured this would be just another case they couldn't close, another notch on this kid's crime bedpost. By the time they cleared the scene, it was past midnight. But their night was far from over, because what came next would be a brazen act of pyrotechnic power that broke new criminal ground in the United States. At 2:30 a.m., an explosion rocked Fort Myers again. The call came in. The Fort Myers office of the Drug Enforcement Agency had just been firebombed. By the time agents arrived, the building was completely engulfed in flames. And for the Lee County detectives, FBI agents, and now displaced DEA team, there was only one name on the suspect list, Jeff Matthews. Because who else on the bingo card would check off pipe bomb and first ever DEA firebombing in the United States all in the same night? But to understand how a kid goes from slinging pies to slinging nose candy to breaking new ground in flammable terrorism, we have to step back a ways. Back before Jeff Matthews was a Matthews, before his legal name change, Jeff was born Jeff Siganek. And while that alone might justify a deep-seated need for a moniker people could actually spell, it's alleged that the name change was less about convenience and more about putting distance between himself and his other reputation, a hot-headed drug distributor with an exceptionally dark streak. It all started back on July 18th of 1987. Reagan's "Mr. Gorbachev, tear this wall down" was still echoing in everyone's ears. People were lining up at theaters to see Dragnet and Inner Space. George Michael was on the radio proclaiming he wanted your sex. while Gloria Estefan warned that the rhythm was gonna getcha. But the rhythm is not what got Craig Karen. 8 .22 caliber bullets did.
Ooh.
You see, Craig had been at a party where cocaine was the key party favor, and when the group needed more to meet the collective inhalation needs of the evening, one of the young guys loaned Craig his car so he could go restock the festivities.
What are we talking about here? More cocaine?
Yeah.
Okay.
As the group anxiously awaited Craig's return, they heard gunshots. When they looked outside, Craig had returned, but he was now exhibiting some pretty severe symptoms of lead poisoning. He wasn't breathing, and nothing kills the vibe at a party faster than a guy coming back from a drug run without a pulse. Police were called.
That is a downer.
Yeah. Police were called, and investigators in Lee County began the long, arduous process of collecting evidence so they could hopefully bring Craig's killer to justice. They just had to figure out who it was first. Craig's girlfriend told police that he owed money to his dealer, a kid named Jeff Siganek. They also learned Jeff had the kind of reputation that meant you really didn't want to be in arrears with him. His late payment policies were, let's just say, not customer-friendly. Police were interested in learning more about Jeff Siganek, and they wouldn't have to wait long. Word got back to Jeff pretty quickly that the cops wanted a word with him. So he took his giant cojones and strutted right into the police station to give them a statement and an alibi. Jeff claimed he'd run into Craig the night of the murder outside a restaurant as he and his girlfriend were heading inside to eat. According to Jeff, Craig left that encounter alive and well. Then, as if to prove he was far too busy for murder, Jeff produced his restaurant receipt. Proof, he said, that he was bellied up to some victuals while someone else was making Craig a statistic. But detectives weren't buying it. The story was too neat. Like when the abusive spouse of a mysteriously missing person just has brand new carpet installed. The story Jeff gave the cops may have been neat, but another local dealer had a very different version. He told police that he sometimes also supplied Craig Karen. Gotta love an honest drug dealer.
Oh, I mean, obviously, everything he says can be taken as truth.
And he said that this had put him squarely on Jeff's bad side because Jeff did not like business competition. On the night of the murder, this entrepreneurial rival was playing a gig with his band when Jeff allegedly showed up and made a point to explain that he had just killed Craig Karen. The message was clear. You don't cross Jeff Siganek without consequences. Over the weeks and months that followed, police heard similar stories from others in the area who knew Jeff and his varied business enterprises, but nothing was solid enough to hang a case on. At least, not until about a year after the murder, when a woman came forward with her own tale about Jeff Siganek. She knew him well. Her ex-boyfriend had worked for him. And, in exchange for allowing Jeff to store guns, money, and drugs in her apartment, Jeff had been paying her rent. She told police that she had actually been walking to the party that night when she saw the gunman who killed Craig Karen. And the trigger man was her ex-boyfriend. She admitted to police that she hadn't come forward sooner because Jeff was her dealer, and she was afraid her drug use would get her into trouble. But apparently watching your ex-boyfriend waste a guy over drugs can rearrange your priorities. She had spent the intervening time getting clean, and now that she wasn't acting as Jeff's stash house or depending on him for her fixes, she wanted to help.
Help who?
The police.
Oh.
Obviously, police wanted to talk to her ex-boyfriend, but they couldn't. He had tragically committed suicide just months after the shooting.
That is inconvenient.
Without him, there was no solid link to prove Jeff had been behind the murder. Police tried to find any evidence to back up her story, but they just kept striking out. That didn't mean her cooperation was worthless, though. Thanks to her, investigators now knew that Andretti's, the restaurant Jeff owned, was the front for his drug operation, and that was something they could use. They began staking out Andretti's, noting who came and went and how often. Of special interest were the customers who never seemed to leave with food. You'd think, in the name of optics, Jeff might have thrown in a free pizza with every powder purchase, but I guess subtlety wasn't on the menu.
Man, that was a great laundering opportunity, too. Like, I've said it before. There's room for growth in crime management.
And one of Jeff's frequently fasting customers was a man named Stephen Franken. Franken was a low-level dealer supplied by Jeff. When one of Franken's customers got caught with drugs and found himself staring down charges, he agreed to help detectives set up Stephen in exchange for a lighter sentence. Franken made multiple sales to the informant for police, which gave them enough for a search warrant. And lo and behold, all sorts of powder-purveying paraphernalia were produced. Faced with that, Franken quickly agreed to testify in court that Siganek, who had now legally changed his name to Matthews, was his supplier, helping police move toward a grand jury indictment on drug distribution charges. It wasn't justice for Craig, but it was at least a step forward in dismantling Fort Myers' thriving cocaine trade. Meanwhile, investigators were called to a dump site where human remains had been found. On the victim's wrist was a nightclub admission band, one last party wristband for a night that didn't end well. Dental records matched the remains to a missing man named Tommy Sellers. When police spoke with Tommy's father, he said he'd been told that his son disappeared from a nightclub after leaving with a man that was known to be a hitman for Jeff Matthews.
This is what I don't understand. If he's so known...
No, the police said that even though they had all these people, everything was hearsay. Everything was, I heard so-and-so say, or I heard so-and-so tell me they saw. Nobody came forward that had a direct link that could testify and say they firsthand saw or had experience of.
So it's not really well known, it's well suspected.
Apparently.
Like there's a difference, right?
Mm-hmm. And why would Matthews allegedly send a hitman after a customer? Well, Tommy's dad also told police that his son was an addict and he owed his dealer, a man named Jeff Matthews, about $1,000. Police knew just how valuable Stephen Franken was at this point because he could testify about Matthews' drug business from the inside. Franken agreed to testify and was given pretrial release, and that's when Jeff allegedly added yet another death to his growing tally. One evening, a man was busy unpacking boxes in his brand new home when there was a tremendous crash. A car came straight through the front wall of his home without slowing down and then blasted right through the back wall into the backyard. I sure hope this guy had a really good homeowner's policy. When police arrived, they realized the driver was dead, and not from the crash. He had been shot. And that victim was Stephen Franken, murdered just 2 days before he was scheduled to testify to the grand jury about Matthews.
Probably a coincidence.
So how had Matthews or somebody working for him managed to get a clear shot at a guy in a moving vehicle? Near the scene, police found a makeshift roadblock built from large tree limbs and brush. Investigators believe Matthews or one of his employees knew Franken's route home from work, set up the roadblock, and waited. When Franken slowed or stopped, the shooter took aim. Franken likely floored it to crash through the barrier and escape, but it was too late. He was already mortally wounded. With his lifeless foot wedged against the gas pedal, the car accelerated straight into our poor innocent bystander's brand new home. Near the roadblock, police took tire tread impressions in hopes of later tying them to a suspect's car. But for as careful as Matthews was, his employees were apparently less so. One man, allegedly one of Matthews' hitmen, was arrested, and like so many others, he was more than willing to sing in exchange for a better sentence.
Well, if you have a talent for singing, you should use it however you can.
He told police that he'd actually been arrested before Franken's murder, but not before Matthews had paid him to stake out Franken and document all of his movements, which he did. Police were getting warmer now. And then he dropped the real bombshell. He said he'd once gone to Matthews' pizza joint after hours to deliver a suppressor for a .22. Matthews, apparently in the mood for some product testing, decided to try it out by casually shooting a contractor who was on the floor laying tile, killing him.
What the
Not because the man had done anything wrong or broken any rules, just to test the product.
That's some movie, man. What the hell? Just laying tile?
He was laying tile in the kitchen. So investigators had the hitman call Matthews from jail and ask him to drop something off. I think it was music. The idea was to lure Matthews in and have the man coax him into implicating himself. Honestly, and I mean this with all the love in my heart, this is the stupidest plan I've ever heard. Have him make you a mixtape, bring it to jail, and confess to murder while you're at it. What the fork? Bless y'all's hearts if this was the best idea you could come up with to entrap a man now implicated in 3 murders and running a minor cocaine empire. Predictably, Matthews didn't bite. He never showed. And while we're at it, this is a good time to point out how absurd this part of the story is. The man driving a black Trans Am was so secretive that nobody, not even his closest friends, apparently knew where he lived. I watched a documentary on this case, and they kept circling back to the detail that nobody knew where he lived like it was some great unsolvable mystery. And I'm sitting here thinking, you can put his pizza joint under constant surveillance, but you can't follow one distinctive black sports car that he drives home at night? Was this investigation being run by Scooby-Doo and the gang? Did someone lose the Mystery Machine's gas card?
That is not fair to Scooby-Doo. They would have noticed a Trans Am.
Right, they would have. This was the 1990s, with 2 federal agencies involved, the FBI, the DEA, and the Lee County Sheriff's Office, and they couldn't even send the man a fruit basket, let alone figure out where he lived. Sure, there was a small apartment above the pizza joint where he was alleged to hang out with his girlfriends, but he didn't actually live there, which I guess makes him tricky to find if you're allergic to basic police work. But now they had enough circumstantial evidence to finally get a search warrant for the pizza joint. They even confiscated his black Trans Am, hoping to match the tires to the tread impressions from the roadblock near where Franken had been murdered. Maybe then they could finally get an arrest warrant. But alas, Scooby and the gang struck out again. The tire treads weren't even a match. Worse, the pizza raid netted them no dough, no drugs, and no evidence tying Matthews to any of the murders. All they uncovered were some bank and credit card statements, and proof that Matthews was apparently afraid of vampires. They found cartridges of silver-tipped .357 ammunition. The only thing even remotely promising was some .22 caliber ammunition, but when metallurgists compared it to the .22s taken from the victims, there was no match. Back to the Mystery Machine to regroup. Matthews was still untouchable. Apparently, the bank and credit card statements, along with whatever documents they dug up, were enough to go after him for running a criminal enterprise, and a warrant was finally issued for his arrest. But Matthews had already vanished to parts unknown, and police just couldn't find the boy. Matthews' girlfriend was also named in the indictment, and she was scared. So she tried to help the police find him. She contacted him and told him that she was worried about the indictment, to which he calmly explained over the phone that when he found out who ratted him out, he would kill them. He was understandably cagey about telling her where he was or where he'd be, so the cops were left with nothing but mismatched tire treads and a growing embarrassment that they were being outsmarted by a smug kid barely old enough to belly up to a bar. Then police got new information from another confidential informant. On the night of Franken's murder, Matthews had rented a car using someone else's credit card. Eureka, a break in the case. When police were able to confirm the tip and tracked down the car, lo and behold, the tire treads matched the impression from the Franken roadblock. The problem? They had zero evidence proving Matthews was the one driving or that he was the one that pulled the trigger. Ruh-roh.
Raggy.
Then, while police were still trying to figure out how they could even find the boy, he showed up, tossing a firebomb into the driveway of a fire marshal who'd made the mistake of doing his job and writing Andretti's up for code violations. As it turns out, the fire marshal wasn't even the real target. He was just a convenient diversion, a way to draw DEA agents and federal authorities to the scene so Matthews could focus on his real problem, the files that the DEA had on him. Files that, if he was ever found and arrested, could actually lead to a conviction. While the cops were processing the fire marshal's driveway, Matthews was busy prepping for the main event, firebombing the DEA office. The results were surprisingly effective. Almost. The building was a complete loss, $4 million in damage. But the file cabinet that held all of the evidence against Matthews? Badly damaged, sure, but the contents inside were intact. $4 million worth of destruction and one magical file cabinet saves the day. Forensics determined that Matthews had built a pipe bomb, packed it with bullets and black powder, and duct taped it between two 2.5-gallon jugs of gasoline. When the bomb exploded just as planned, it ruptured the gas containers, sending gasoline everywhere and spreading the fire fast. But apparently this file cabinet was made of steel and sorcery. Once investigators had recovered enough pieces of the bomb to determine what materials had been used, they began canvassing local hardware stores. Eventually they got a hit. One employee remembered a recent purchase, and when shown photos, he identified Matthews as the buyer. Now this part is conjecture on my part, but given what investigators found later, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the hardware dealer's confirmation was both reassuring and terrifying. Reassuring because it proved they were on the right track. Terrifying because it didn't look like Matthews had only purchased enough material for those 2 bombs. It seemed like he might have other plans. Meanwhile, at gas stations across the area, cops were asking if anyone had seen someone recently filling 2 2.5-gallon cans of gasoline. Apparently, Matthews had the bad luck of doing it under the watchful eye of the most observant gas station attendant in Florida, because not only did this guy remember the purchase, he was able to identify Matthews as the one who made it. At this point, police were able to get cooperation from Matthews' wireless provider, I assume through a warrant, and they narrowed his whereabouts to the Orlando area, but they could never pin him down to anything smaller than a 2-mile radius. One of Matthews' friends told police that he'd written to her, nice of him to keep up on his correspondence while on the run. He begged her not to believe anything the police were saying about him. She agreed to let them tap her phones because Matthews was making regular calls to her. All the calls came from payphones in the Orlando area, but they were too short for police to get there in time to nab him. And then, a storage unit manager called police. A man matching Matthews' description was at an Orlando area storage facility. Police and federal agents scrambled to the scene where they spotted a man unloading a rented truck. Suddenly, he was swarmed by federal agents with guns drawn, but the man was not Matthews. I'm guessing the cops probably owed the poor guy a new pair of pants after that. Then a new break. A realtor in Orlando recognized Matthews as a man who had rented a house from him before the bombings. Police were ready to go. They raided the house and found not Matthews. But they did find common materials that could be used to make bombs, which was unsettling enough. But more unsettling was the note they found addressed to the Lee County Sheriff's Office, daring them to catch him if they could.
Oh.
Matthews was turning the investigation into a farce, and the police had no choice but to dance to his tune while he pulled the puppet strings. By now, police had narrowed down the part of Orlando where Matthews had been making the majority of those payphone calls to his friend. So they literally scattered officers throughout the area, just waiting for the next call, hoping that they could pinpoint his location fast enough to get to him. Just cops casually waiting around for phone calls.
That sounds like par for the course.
Scattered over a 2-mile area. But this time, it worked. They traced the phone call to a payphone, and the girl was able to keep Matthews talking long enough for police to get there. When they rolled up, he was still on the phone, hat pulled low, a roll of quarters by his side. 3 years of police work ended, not with a high-speed chase, not with a SWAT raid, but with a peaceful arrest at a Florida payphone where Matthews had been talking to a girl. Matthews agreed to cooperate with investigators to avoid the death penalty for the multiple murders that he was being accused of. With him under arrest, many of those lower-level drug dealers who had acted as informants throughout the investigation were now a lot more willing to talk and give specifics, and his chances of an acquittal were slim, so he pled guilty to running a criminal enterprise. Recognizing that his run was over, Matthews requested to speak with investigators on July 31, 1990. He claimed that he had information that they needed to act on immediately, or innocent people would be likely killed. He revealed the location of a storage unit full of explosives, and inside it, a van that had been booby-trapped to explode. Investigators were skeptical and concerned that it could be an ambush. But when bomb squads arrived, they found exactly what he described, a van wired to detonate. Inside were dozens of pipe bombs, bomb-making materials, an AR-15, a MAC-10, a MAC-11, and the .22 caliber pistol with a suppressor.
He's got all the calibers covered there. He's got .22, .380, 9mm.
There were also rubber masks and federal agency raid jackets with bomb-making manuals. And in his fit of honesty, Matthews told police the evidence that they needed to tie him to the unprovoked murder of the contractor. It had been right under their noses. The house that they'd raided, the one with the taunting note, the contractor's body had been transported there in a freezer and buried right in the backyard. Investigators found him exactly where Matthews said he'd be. Matthews was sentenced to 100 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He is still in prison in Florida, where he will almost certainly remain for the rest of his life. Everyone knows the story of the Oklahoma City bombing, and one of the agencies affected there was the DEA. But most people don't know that the very first DEA bombing happened 5 years earlier in Fort Myers, Florida, carried out by a 23-year-old kid named Jeff, who peddled a lot more than pizza. And that's the story of Pizza, Powder, and Pyrotechnics, the boy who bombed the feds on Crime to Burn. And if you enjoyed that, I highly recommend you go and listen to Obedience to Ashes, Cults, Chaos, and Criminal Fires. That story was also in Fort Myers. And last June, we dropped the Benson car bombing case, which was in Naples, right next to Fort Myers. Okay, now I can see you.
I can also see you.
Can you see this?
I can't unsee that. Insert playful banter here.
Your dog is licking the chair. It's not
Ding,
really...
ding, ding, balls is the answer. It's starting to become compulsory behavior, but I can't afford dog therapy. We're just going to have to use knock it the fuck off therapy.
The fabric's delicious. He's probably just trying to wipe his tongue off. Because you guys had to explain to me what Naruto running was.
So it was definitely aliens.
It was probably aliens.
This episode was brought to you by my ever-increasing desire to get better chairs for this bar. And they're really not even bad. I'm just a little bitch.
I have issues. Maybe I just need to learn to breathe quieter.
We totally meant to not make that sound. It's not the size of your episode, it's how you use it.
Can you make this bigger, please?
That's what she said. You can say pizza with pursed lips.
It happened in Fort Myers, Florida, a town I'm seriously starting to worry about.
What is this? This is a recurring... It's like the third episode of Fort Myers. They need laser tag or something to do. This episode was brought to you by Fort Myers laser tag. Don't blow shit up. All my drugs are fingers. Focus, Danielson.
This is a story about powerful, pernicious powder.
This episode is brought to you by Nike. Outrun your hubris. I don't care if y'all don't wear underwear. Y'all are awesome. Great success!
It's time for the sacred opening ritual.
Not your burping. That's fine. You can make up urban legends about whatever. I got a 10-foot but that doesn't make it true.
That's why I married you.
Don't worry. I already tested that chair twice. You might want to let it air out. This seat has a history. Hope you like mystery smells. Oh, I wouldn't sit there unless you're into warm, suspicious cushions. Some chairs creak. That one announces you. Steve blessed that seat personally with beans.
Steve Beans.
That seat's got more cushion for the pushin', and by pushin', I mean gas.
That's so stupid.
Careful. That seat still has Gerald's left man bean imprinted in it.
What happened to the right one?
That cushion's got a thigh goblin dent from last year. We kept it for history.
The thigh goblin is my favorite.
You're sitting right in the meat marble groove. That's okay. I think we're at the end of this nonsense. And this episode was brought to you by synonyms for balls. Thigh goblins. Lap hamsters. Wombats in a sack. Ferret eggs. Kangaroo carry-ons. Squirrel rations. Prophecy pebbles. Blessing bulbs. Doctrine dumplings. Sacred stress balls. Snack orbs. High council hazelnuts. Anointed almonds. That dent? Oh, that's Gerald's Thigh Goblin Memorial. Sit at your own risk. You might need a ladder to climb out of that divot.
Shouldn't all sacred newsletters have a happy ending?
I will work overtime. I will work hand over fist to make sure that you have a happy ending. I like to wear wigs.
I feel like I have several different people constantly blathering in my brain.
That's me.
You're blathering in my brain?
Well, your ear hole.
It's a direct route to your Steve gland, too.
Well, but I don't have as long of fingers as Steve.
It's okay. You're blessed in other areas.
Some people say it's a no-no square. Mine's a yes-yes triangle. And this episode was brought to you by my balls as synonyms.
Oh, I don't have balls.
Well, if you did, you'd keep them in a pouch. Now I'm breathing heavily. Attention, brothers and sisters, and miscellaneous followers of Steve. This is your saboteur of the sacred seating arrangement speaking. Effective immediately. All members are reminded to check their chairs before sitting. Several cushions in the Hall of Assemblage still bear the permanent imprints of rogue thigh goblins from last month's beanbag blessing. These indentations are not decorative, nor are they Steve-approved ergonomic enhancements. If your seat feels unusually warm, it may be haunted. If it smells faintly of chili, it is definitely haunted. Report all haunted thigh goblin sightings to the Snack Council for exorcism and Febreze. Remember, Steve loves you, but he will not protect you from a cursed cushion. Sit responsibly. Meeting adjourned. Shazam.
Do you love true crime and travel? Having traveled the world solo the last couple of years and being obsessed with true crime, I found myself researching others who took the same vacations but never made it home. The Last Trip is a true crime podcast covering missing and murdered people that were living their best lives on vacation. I'm your host, Jamie Beebe, and each week I'll bring you on The Last Trip, taking a deep dive into vacation culture and travel spots, tips on staying alive while traveling, and ultimately recreating someone's last days in paradise. What led to their last trip? What are the hard facts? What is the final outcome? And could you be next? David Sneddon was a 24-year-old college student from Utah attending Mandarin classes in Beijing when he mysteriously disappeared while hiking Tiger Leaping Gorge. Chinese authorities said he drowned in the gorge, and U.S. authorities agreed, although his body was never found and his parents didn't believe that. 7 years later, out of the blue, they got a phone call from a former U.S. official who had evidence David is still alive. This case sounds like a Hollywood movie, but evidence doesn't lie. So where is David Sneddon? Famous rugby player and Celebrity X Factor contestant Levi Davis went missing in Barcelona last year while on a backpacking trip through Europe. Just days before he vanished, he posted a 15-minute video to his Instagram account saying his life was in danger and people were after him. After he disappeared, several theories emerged. But what really happened to Levi Davis? Join me, Jamie Beebe, co-host of the popular true crime series Strictly Stalking, as I embark on a brand new adventure combining true crime and travel. Listen to The Last Trip wherever you get your podcasts.